there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 2, Episode 10, Account Executives in a Complete, Exhaustive Playbook and Messaging Guide for Account Executives to Self-Service More Meetings Than Ever Before. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a favor, go to flipthescript.co and be sure to download the deck because this session is extremely meaty, so I want to make sure you have it in front of you at each step of the way. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump into the content. There are going to be three different pieces to today's agenda. Those are going to be three very, very extensive pieces, though, full disclosure. Number one, comprehensive structure of the AE playbook. What are all the different angles that you can go? If you have watched Personalization at Scale and you have watched that playbook, full disclosure, there's even more that's going to be added today. So this isn't going to be a rehash of the other stuff that I've done. That's going to be included. But I'm also going to be including a lot of different sequences that I've never gone through before. Number two, structure of an email, and number three, structure of a cold call. So for all the people out there who have seen Personalization at Scale, at one point in the session, I will excuse you from the conversation and let you go about your day, but that point is not yet. Lucky for you, so let's jump in. So number one, structure of a playbook. When it comes to a playbook, for every sequence that I build within Outreach, it is going to look in terms of structure and in terms of types of activity per medium the exact same. So every sequence that I run is 16 steps over 21 business days that is more heavy on the back end in terms of aggression of timing of outreach than it is in the front end. So I actually defer to the theory of MJ Hoffman did a study, the author of Why You Now, on basically the timing of sequences and basically cadence of actions. And he understood, his theory was that if you reach out too aggressively in the beginning, then you scare your buyer, especially if you're not personalized. And if you peter out near the end, then basically you're teaching your buyer that if they just wait long enough that you will go away. So he suggested and posited that you flip it. You're you're easier in the beginning, you get to know them, you send them a couple of pieces of outreach, and then you get more aggressive near the end of the sequence so that basically the person, by this time, they know who you are, they know that they know that you know them because you've been personalizing, and by the end of the sequence, you're getting more aggressive so they think if they don't respond to you, you're not going to go away. So in terms of how practically that works out, there's 5 different pods to every single sequence that I do. It starts with a LinkedIn research on day 1. So basically at this step of the game, I'm having my reps go to LinkedIn, make sure a couple of things. Number one, data is not clean. So anyone who has clean, completely pristine and clean hygiene within their CRM, I would like you to reach out to me on LinkedIn because I've never met a company who had 100% accurate CRM data. But essentially at this first onset, one of the points of why I have them go to LinkedIn is because you want to make sure that if you're spending the time to personalize to this person, if you're spending the time to do outreach and send them a lot of different emails, that they are the right person for you at the company, number one, and number two, they're still at that company. So there's a lot of churn in tech. People go to different roles all the time, and so we want to make sure that this is indeed the correct person. But we basically, at that step of the game, we have the AE or the SDR, pull 3 personalized premises about that person that we'll go into later what those can look like and put them into Outreach as their sales engagement provider in the custom tags. So essentially that's the first step of 16. For the remaining 15 steps, we do 5 emails, 10 cold calls, and I want you to think of it in terms of 5 different pods. Pod number 1 is going to start on day 1. So day 1, you're going to do the LinkedIn research step. You're going to pick out 3 personalized premises that are down to that person in specific that we'll go over later what they are. And you want to send out a cold email on day 1. That's your first email. And we'll go into the structure of that email. And cold call on that day and cold call on day 2 and leave a voicemail. So basically you're going cold email, cold call, day 1, 1, 2 is the first pod. If you want to know more about these follow-up emails and what they look like, today we're going to go into the first email and what it looks like. But if you want to know more about what the follow-up emails look like, if you go into season 1 or in the core session, session 5, I talk a lot about the follow-up email messages that we're sending, so for a comprehensive strategy. But point being, first pod is day 1, 1, 2. It's cold email, cold call. Second pod with a delta of 6 business days is going to be cold email, cold call, and it's going to go day 889. So this is a reply email. Again, for the text, go to the follow-up email session. But pod number 2, you get the point, starts on day 8, goes 889, cold email, cold call. Pod number 3 with a 5-day business day delta is going to start on day 13. It's going to be cold email, cold call. I think you should start to see a trend. Pod number 4, there's going to be a 4-day business delta, which is going to be cold email, cold call on 18/18/19. And then pod number 5 is going to be a 1-day delta, and it's going to be cold call with a voice, or cold call, and breakup email. So if it has a voicemail, it is noted on this actual sheet of where I'm leaving a voicemail and where I'm not. So you'll see I'm leaving a voicemail at my second cold call on day 2. And I'm also leaving a voicemail on day 21, which is my 15th step and my 10th cold call. But essentially the structure of the voicemail can relatively stay the same. I have a session on voicemails if you want to go through that. But pod number 5 is 20, 21, 21. So that you're getting more aggressive in the back end to where your buyer at this point is like, okay, they know who I am because they've been sending me this outreach and leaving voicemails that have a lot to do with something that I said in specific. And by the end of this sequence, they're saying, okay, like this person's not going to leave me alone, so I need to at least respond to with something. So the most common response to our cold outreach is nothing. And that unfortunately is the only kind of response, if you will, that we cannot counter. So we want to garner some type of response to get into some level of engagement, not risking, not getting a response for response sake. We want to do it on the right premise, but we essentially are really trying to get a conversation going with this person. So this is the structure of a sequence for every sequence that I do. So now I want to go into all of the different types of sequences that I am deploying amongst my teams, and I am drilling down to the source of the lead for the premise of the sequence. I'm also including in that premise personalization down to the actual person that I'm talking to. So there are 2 types of sequences that you can really bifurcate in your mind. Number 1 are these postbound sequences, where basically postbound is anything in between true inbound, that's a demo request, or true outbound that they've never heard of you. Postbound is everything in between. So I'm going to give you a number of examples, but it's basically the results of marketing effort as the source of the sequence. So there's going to be 30 sequences in total, and I don't remember the volume, but all of the postbound sequences where marketing till is the premise, you're going to see highlighted in blue. And the second bucket is going to be what I call scenarios. So these are going to be types of situations that you can segment users on based on something that's valuable to you as a criteria, but you are not using that only for the breadth of your message. So regardless of what the sequence scenario or postbound premise is, you're still going to include personalization to that person in specific. So, I mean, whether that's a content download or that's demoed in the past or that's they viewed your website, you're going to say, and we'll go into a little bit of how you can hook this in the first line of the email, but you're going to say, I noticed that you reason for my outreach is I noticed you downloaded this piece of content, but more importantly, I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn. Or reason for my outreach is I noticed that you attended our webinar on scaling, outbound AE Playbook, but more importantly, I saw that you engaged with this person's content on LinkedIn. Or a reason for my outreach is I noticed that you just left executive churn. You just left this company and joined a new one. One other thing is I saw that you wrote this article, where you're talking about X, Y, and Z, or I noticed in your header on LinkedIn that you're talking about how you love scaling effective teams. So keep in mind all the scenarios and sequences I'm about to go into. It is to frame up the grouping of people that you're about to talk to, and you, in some cases, want to mention that actual premise within the sequence. Sometimes you don't. We'll go into that too. But basically, that is not the only level of personalization that you're going to do. Most of the industry has, someone's phone just went off with a Coldplay, I think, ringtone. Interesting. And he made fun of me for liking Switchfoot as my first band. Anywho, so when it comes to these personalized sequences, most people would call personalization within the industry what is truly just relevance. So they would call buyer persona something that's personalized, personalized in terms of buyer persona, or personalized in terms of industry vertical, or personalized in terms of technographic setup. But that is not personalization. Personalization is something about an individual that you cannot multiply to other people. Relevance is something where you can segment several users together and talk about that premise. So today we're going to talk about both. How do you ensure from a playbook perspective that you're reaching out on all the relevant premises, but you're also tying in a level of detail and personalization so the person knows that you know exactly who they are. So let's talk about the different postbound premises and scenarios. I've divided them into two buckets on this slide. On this side, you're going to see bucket number 1, where you would mention the premise in your sequence. So the examples are here. I hope you've downloaded the deck because it's pretty meaty, but content downloads, event attendees, webinar registrants, high value MQL, executive churn. This is through a platform called User Gems, where if someone used your product and then went to another organization that you haven't sold into that you want to, there's a way to automate this through a platform called User Gems, where you can do that very quickly and in real time. Firmographic triggers for hypergrowth. I put this as an example, but this is a Crunch-based trigger. Common VCs to you. Maybe someone who you're prospecting into shares a common VC to you. Common VC to your customer. Maybe they share a common VC with someone who has used your product and really, really liked your product. Demoed in the past and LinkedIn engagement. Again, in the blue is the marketing efforts. That's the true postbound scenarios where marketing fills the leads. And in the white, it is cold scenarios. Basically, you're trying to segment these users on a criteria that's interesting to you that might cause higher buyer intent or quality, but is not someone who is fed to you. That's not from marketing. It's from that you would have to self-source. On bucket number 2, this is the same type of setup in terms of blue and white. White is outbound. Blue comes from marketing that people would call inbound, but I've renamed it postbound. But the difference is in bucket number 2, you wouldn't mention the premise in your outreach. So the only kind of premise that you're going to talk about is a personalized reason to them. And I'll tell you why. A lot of these different examples, something can be really creepy or really invasive. And one of the best examples is website views. So people come to your website, and if you're not careful, you can do this successfully, but it's a little more tricky and it doesn't work all the time. But if you call out that they went to your website, sometimes people can feel invaded upon. So, it's kind of like whenever a little kid jumps under the covers because they think there's a monster. It doesn't change the reality of if there's a monster or not outside of the covers, but it changes their view of it. So in terms of website views, if you're in tech, you know that people can track whenever other people come to your website. However, some case scenarios in some cultures of companies, they don't want to bring this top of mind for their buyers. So I put this list for types of premises that you wouldn't want to necessarily mention the premise, but it's still net is a valuable lead to you. Another great example over here, I think I called it example, and it's a new word. Another great example is company funding. I see a lot of people reaching out and saying, hey, I noticed that you just raised $25 million from Salesforce. Want to buy my shit? Because I sell shit for money. It's a good premise. It means that they're probably in market, maybe. It means that they have cash, but I would, I'm from Texas, so my mom says don't talk about, politics, religion, or money at the dinner table. Leave that for outside. So in terms of company funding, yes, this means that they're a high value lead to us, but you want to be appropriate enough to just take this as a trigger, but not necessarily just say hey, you want to buy my stuff? Because I notice you have a lot of cash. So you want to personalize down to that person knowing that they have, cash in their wallet, but being appropriate enough to not bring it up. So in review, bucket number 1 is premises, postbound premises and scenarios, outbound scenarios where you would mention the premise. The blue is the marketing and the white is the cold scenario. And then bucket number 2, blue is the marketing, white is the cold scenario or outbound scenario, if you will. But in bucket number 2, I wouldn't mention the premise of this and only personalize to that person. These I have reviewed. I have reviewed these in personalization at scale. So to all those people who are wondering whether I have anything else when it comes to account executives or whether I'm just repurposing content, well, I was worried about it for a long time. But I started thinking about all the different angles that I went as an account executive, and I actually was surprised by the amount of things that I did as an account executive that weren't necessarily relevant to SDR. So I have an additional 14 sequences on top of these 16 that I ran as an account executive that I wouldn't necessarily run as an SDR for lead gen. So let's dive in. Both of these buckets, by the way, are buckets where you would mention the premise. So all of the scenarios that or all the postbound sequences and outbound scenarios that I came up with, you would in fact mention the premise. So don't be confused, they're both number one, both of them I would mention the premise. So I would build let's go in one by one because I haven't ever reviewed these before. But number one is referral business in from the C-level. So this is someone where maybe your CEO or CRO or your CTO, et cetera, knows someone at an organization and they pass through the lead to you. So within playbooks, the number one rule is you need to seek to sequence everything, to keep it straight in your mind, to bifurcate out the structure, to understand if something's working, to be able to study the results, to reassure that you have the accountability that you're following up on these leads. You need to sequence everything. So data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay. You want to understand what are the results from these sequences so you can understand as an AE where should you double down in terms of lead generation. So referral business in from the C-level is the first sequence. The difference between the blue and the white in this scenario is the blue is fed to you by someone out, externally, and the white isn't. So in this previous slide, the blue was fed to you by marketing and the white wasn't. And in this case scenario, the blue is fed to you by someone else, and the white, you are, through automation, it is being loaded based on another premise that isn't being fed to you. So number one, referral business in from the C-level. Number two, networking events. So I went to a number of networking events as an account executive where I would meet people and, maybe I'd get their cards and they'd, have a couple IPAs and be like, oh, your business sounds great. And then they give me their card and then we, maybe I'd send them a follow-up email. Usually, I would forget. And even if I did send them a follow-up email, they, didn't set the meeting. So you want to put some kind of structure here and you want to follow up with them several times and really control the quote unquote buyer journey so you make sure you make the most of these leads. So what's great about this sequence is you can really choose who you want to sequence. So if I go to a networking event, like we all know that we run into some people that are great, some people that are, B, and some people that are C, dependent on company size or role, et cetera. So in this case scenario for the networking events, I would sequence people, only the ones that I really, really wanted to talk to so I could save myself some time. Number three, closed lost is a great bucket. So essentially, closed lost, I would have a number of different reasons, lethal granularity in my CRM as to close loss reasons. I've never seen an org that has done this to the level that, from my perspective, they should, but close loss is going to come down to a lot of different things. Was this not the right technographic setup? Did they not have enough people? Did they, for my last company, did they sell primarily field sales? Did they sell, in Spanish and we need to talk to people who are selling predominantly in English? Was this not the right title, et cetera? Like, what is the closed loss reason? And then there's this big bucket where basically AEs just say like, oh, well, they went dark on me. Whole nother topic for a whole nother time. TLDR probably went dark on you because something you said or didn't say, in my opinion. However, point being, for closed loss reasons, you want to have a default drop-down menu within your CRM. I'm probably going to do another session on this in deep granularity in season number 3 for all the operators out there. But I would have an extensive list of reasoning of closed loss reasons, and I'll give you an example of why. Let's say I had 75 deals for my last company, Chorus. I had 75 deals that we prospected into, we started talking to them, And when it came down to it, when we met with them, they said like, hey, we're actually really, yes, we have a web conferencing software, we use Zoom, but we're actually predominantly field sales. So we're not a fit at that point. Pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, most organizations, all organizations, are not field sellers anymore. We can't meet in the actual field. So all of a sudden, you saw a mass adoption that you couldn't have seen coming to remote selling out of necessity, not preference. So if you have built out the close loss triggers and said, hey, all of these teams were field sellers and that's the reason why we couldn't sell into them, you now have a short list of who those 75 companies were so that you can engage with them and say like, hey, last time we talked, it wasn't a fit because you were, had a field selling strategy. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we've been seeing people go remote, remote more than ever. Would it be interesting now to have some kind of conversation of how you're adapting to that, and if we can be of any enablement of getting your team remote selling quickly and lethally as fast as possible. So all of that is possible if you have close loss reasons that were granular and your reps were logging it. So a close loss trigger sequence can be based on whatever trigger that you like. So for instance, and I go into it a little bit later, but let's say it's a language, they speak predominantly Spanish and you only sell into English, and it's like, okay, I have the close loss sequence, and then all of a sudden we expand to Spanish speaking, within our CI platform. It's like, okay, now I have a close loss sequence that I want to populate everyone who spoke Spanish because now we sell into them. Or let's say an integration, you only integrated with Zoom, you did not integrate with GoToMeeting. And all of a sudden you integrate with GoToMeeting and then you pull a quick list of all the closed loss deals that close loss because of quote unquote poor qualification, that they use GoToMeeting. You don't sell into people with GoToMeeting. All of a sudden you do, and now you have a short list of which to do so. So this can be a great sequence with low-hanging fruit, especially for something that you don't see coming like COVID, where you can just pull these people and throw them into the sequence and say, hey, reason for my outreach is, and you can automate this, reason for my outreach is, and you can either backfill the reason, and then I would always suggest editing and being very careful here and research driven as with anything, but it's a quick way to understand like, oh, okay, maybe when we expand to another language, we are actually converting at 80%. And so these integrations are doing it, or these language extensions are doing us from a pipeline perspective some great favors. So it's like sequence everything and then look for the data. Play for the network of the C-level, that's number 4. In the first case scenario, your C-level was referring someone in. In the first case postbound sequence, your C-level is referring someone into you. Number 4, you are actively going to your C-level's network. Quick way to do this is I always would not do it without their permission. Go to their LinkedIn, look at all the people they're connected to, see if any of those people are engaging with their content, see if any of those people are important to you, and then ping them and say, hey, Roy, notice that you were connected to X, Y, and Z. Like, is there an interest situation? Or B, more importantly, can I do outreach to this person, anything that I should know, because it's higher likelihood because they know each other. So I've heard a lot of different, we did this a lot when I was at Chorus, and I would hear a lot of people on the line saying like, hey, I'm taking a demo out of respect for X, Y, and Z, so it's a great way to scoop some low-hanging fruit. Number 5, a referral play of the network of existing and happy customers. Never seen this one done before. Did it? Worked extremely well. Hi, Luke. Reason for my outreach is I read this article the other day about 87% of people, true story, are willing to make an introduction to someone within their network if they're happy with the product, but only 7% of sellers actually ask for them. More importantly, I saw that you were connected with this person on LinkedIn. I hate to be the cheesy sales rep here, but is there any remote possibility you'd be willing to make the introduction? Either way, thank you again for your core business, and I hope you're staying safe with everything going on in the world. But this is a really high net sequence, and especially for account executives, because in this case scenario, the happy customers, if you're selling correctly, wink, you should be friends with. You should be a text message away. If they've bought millions of dollars worth of your product and they are happy, high likelihood it's because you've had some kind of relationship with them. You built rapport, trust, respect, etc. And so this can be a great play for AEs in specific, because they're really close to the customer, whereas in an SDR's case, like they can use this sequence, full disclosure, they can use a lot of these sequences, but they don't have the relationship with the customer like the account executive does. So this is a great low-hanging fruit that I used to use. VC Partners Network. Your VC partners want you to do really well. And I can think of 5 people in specific that they said, I want you to use my network, but you need to do the groundwork. So a great sequence that you can build off the top of this is scour through, I'll give you a great example. Doug Landis was a VC partner with Chorus, my last company. And it was like, Doug was like constantly saying like, hey, just go to my LinkedIn, find people, et cetera, and like, I'll see if they'd be willing to chat. But it was a really, really warm intro and really, really nice of Doug because Doug wanted to see Chorus successful. So VC partner, network, in most cases, they're willing to make those introductions. So you want to build a sequence based on it so that you can make sure that you structure all the outreach that you're going to send. Number 7, scouring review sites and looking for negative reviews of your competitor. This is a great angle. Let's say I am, competing East Side, West Side story. I'm East Side. I want to understand who are the unhappy, actively unhappy customers of West Side. So if you go to third-party review sites like G2 for buyer intent or Trust Radius is another example, you will see a litany of different reviews where people are leaving reviews of the software. So I have scoured through before and said, okay, are there unhappy reviews of people who are using West Side? And are those people that I want to sell into? And then I can sequence them and, be very careful here of like reason for my outreach is it looked like you were less than pleased, with your experience of West Side. More importantly, I saw you wrote this article about da-da-da, so I would always use the same, and we'll get into how to personalize in a second, always use the same level of alacrity and, level of detail whenever prospecting into someone who, you're using one of these scenarios. I wouldn't just rely on that review. I would always make it about something positive and about them paired along with this review. So be very, very careful here in terms of the language that you use, but I do think that it signals to your prospect that you're listening, that you're paying attention, which, typically if they are churning and they're leaving a negative review, they are bereft of that quality in the competitor that they were using, your competitor that they were using. The last 7 over here, number 1, channel play. So there's a lot of different softwares that play well together, a lot of different softwares that try to channel sell together. I have seen it on rare occasion done super well because of the data pass. So I would want to put a sequence together that says, for instance, Outreach is a sales engagement software, Chorus is a conversation intelligence software. Someone buys sales engagement like Outreach, they're probably open to the idea or wanting some kind of vendor to really digest those conversations and understand what they can do with them. So Outreach structured the outreach. Chorus really made the extensive conversations, the discovery for the account executives, et cetera, better. So it's like there's a channel play there. So you want to build a sequence on this and then be proactive about like, if it's not happening, rule of thumb in business or anything, if it's not happening for you, go make it happen. Don't hold anyone else responsible for your quota or be accountable for your numbers. So I have in a lot of these cases just bang down someone's door and be like, hey, we should sell, co-sell with Outreach. Like, hey, okay, Outreach, are you interested in this? Let's figure out how to pipe the data through. But this can be a great, again, I would always tie in personalization. Reason for my outreach is I noticed that you just bought Outreach as a sales engagement software. More importantly, I saw this article that you wrote on scaling effective teams where you're talking about X, Y, and Z. So always make it about them, but a really, really good postbound sequence to put together. Number 2, late cycle, I like flobbed it up there. Late cycle competitive deal. So a lot of times we will get to know too late, in my opinion, that someone is evaluating our competitor. High risk, high reward deals, high immediate deals that you want to talk to, because not only are they about to select someone, they're about to select your competitor. So if you win this deal, you not only won a deal, you won the deal out of the lion's mouth of who you're competing with. So a late cycle competitive deal, you can run a lot of different language, but I'd say like, hey, I would use the would have pitch which if you want to know more about what the would have pitch is, go to the Silver Bullet Central. I believe it's episode 2. Yeah, it is episode 2 is the would have pitch, but essentially you want to communicate to your buyer, you know, hey, reason for my outreach is normally I would have gone on this diatribe about how you wrote this article on LinkedIn about scaling effective teams and try to give you some cheesy pitch on what if you could, you know, make your conversations better, scale your teams effectively and the revenue as a result. But considering you're already, you know, late stage considering my competitor, I'll just say this. Give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to hear a little bit more about why you were thinking of buying that software, what you were looking to achieve, and we can see, you know, if we're a fit. If nothing else, I would use the worst case scenario pitch, also in Silver Bullet Central, where I'd say, you know, worst case scenario, or if for nothing else, so that you just have the competitive details in the back of your mind. Number 3, people who scheduled but no-showed. This is a good one that you can renege deals and basically get them back on the line. I would use very fall on your sword self-deprecation language there of like, hey, you know, reason for my outreach is I noticed you originally scheduled a demo and then, you know, our wires got crossed and it wasn't able to happen. I wouldn't blame them for it of not showing up, but say like, it must have been because of my super annoying, overly aggressive outreach. I would take accountability and, you know, have a little humility whenever you're coming into this deal to try to get them to respond, to at least re-engage, if nothing else, worst case scenario, for a reason of why they no-showed, because it might be a legitimate reason that they did pull out a cycle. Agency sell, so this is, you know, there are a lot of different agencies who will sell, you know, grouping of software to get startups off the floor, enterprise customers off the floor, so this is a good way to sequence. Number 5, your prospect releases significant product that has to do with the product that you sell. You know, again, sequence, data. It is hard in the beginning to set up the infrastructure, but it will make massive amount of impact within your sales cycle and within the amount that you can self-prospect and how quickly. So, you know, I always put the hard work up front so that, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, you know, easy things, hard life, hard things, easy life. So it's like I want to do the hard things up front so that my life is easier on the back end, because that's the majority of my experience is on the back end. So if your prospect, you know, release a significant product that has to do with you, you want to throw them into this sequence and, you know, hook that to what you do as a company and try and stick the landing in the CTA. Number 6, a deal that went competitive around renewal. So this is an example of a closed loss trigger, but I usually do a separate sequence for this one. Of if someone went to your competitor, you want to, full disclosure, go to the Snowball Snuggie, which is Silver Bullet Central episode 4. Full disclosure, in the meantime, don't pout. Don't blame anyone. Don't get mad that they went with your competitor. Be there, add value, smiles up, you know, lead with character. And then when they're around renewal, ping and understand, you know, how was their experience? Did they do well? Did they get the outcome they were looking to achieve? So you want to build that relationship in the meantime. Seems overexhaustive. It is the faster way to sell. I would bet you $1 billion on it, is lead with character all along the way, and then you just need to ask for the meeting on the back end, and they're more than happy to talk to you. My experience, especially in tech, is, you know, things don't work. There were bugs. They didn't get the outcome they were looking for. It isn't the green, you know, green grass, yellow brick road with Dorothy and this, you know, 18 dwarves or whatever the story is that they thought it was whenever they purchased the product. I think I just mixed stories. You get the point. It is not the outcome. Oftentimes doesn't result from what they wanted from the initial onset purchase. So you want to be there the entire way, smiles up, don't blame them, don't get mad, add value, and then when they come up around renewal, bring it up 2 months out or a month and a half out. I would say a month at the very, very longest, you know, because you want to make sure they have time to evaluate and see what their experience was, and if there was any holes, if you could, you know, fill those holes to, you know, make them want to make a switch. And then the last sequence here is act of God sequence. So this is very prevalent, especially during COVID. No offense to act of God sequences when something happens externally, you know, that's really, really impactful to a massive amount of people that basically no one could have seen coming. So great example is the pandemic. It's not like Zoom employees and Zoom sellers and Charmin toilet paper salespeople all of a sudden got massively better at selling. there was just an act of God that came in where people were scared and they wanted to buy a bunch of toilet paper as a result for some reason. And no judgment, I did it too. And they also needed to be selling remotely more than ever before, and they needed to shift all the schools to remote. So the act of God sequence is really a relevant sequence because you're more so going B2C style. Like, you no longer really have to really dig to get to know your prospect because it's coming off the shelves anyway. So you just want to be right place, right time, and really shoot your blanket. This is the only case scenario that I would say that personalization, other than B2C style. Full disclosure, I do not come from the school of thought that you should only personalize with enterprise and strategic, but you shouldn't for lower level SMB. I also don't come from the school of thought that you should personalize for a VP and a director and a manager, but you shouldn't for, or VP and director, but you shouldn't for a manager. It's not like someone loves personalization whenever they're a director, but hated it whenever they were a manager. Or it's not like someone works for, an SMB company like Chorus and they hated personalization, and didn't find value in it. But once they transferred over to Intel, they started to love it. People are people, and they love personalization. So I'd say I would set the minimum bar. Again, this is if you're outside, like if you're non-B2C, like you are tasked with setting anywhere from 5 upwards of 25 meetings, then personalization mixed with relevance is going to be your silver bullet. So I would sequence, everyone based on some level of personalization and then tying the personalization, which we'll get into in a minute. But Active God sequence is the only one outside of B2C that I would say it's a relevance game at this point, because you just need to get in front of people. Like, they're going to buy State Farm. You just need to be sure that you're the rep, that you're the friendly neighborhood rep that comes in at the right time. So I would start spray and pray at that point and say, like, okay, people are buying toilet paper. I want to make sure they buy it from me. So I'm going to blast my TAM, with any kind of relevant messaging so I can get in front of them. 5 plans of how to co-hunt your book together if you are an account executive and you have an SDR. I go much deeper in this in another session. I can't remember the episode, but it's within season 2 on how to hunt your book together them holistically. But I'm just going to go through this briefly as a kind of review. Number 1, the first option that you have is basically an SDR uses all 30 of the sequences that I just mentioned with all of the prospects within your book. So let's say you have 200 accounts. So your SDR uses all 30 sequences on all 200 accounts with all your prospects. And for who they weren't successful with, you circle back and you try and lead gen based on what you think within those 30 sequences. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is you split the accounts. So you give 100 to the SDR, I give 100 to my SDR, I keep 100 for myself, and we both run all 30 sequences and scenarios for those accounts. The ones we weren't successful for, we switch. And I would say, give it 2 months. 2 months, is how long it should be taking you to reach out to all these people, especially if you're doing personalized messaging. So after 2 months, I'd switch. The third option is basically the AE calls on the decision maker or the higher ups, and the SDR calls on a frontline manager, someone who does hit ICT, ideal customer title, but isn't the cream of the crop. So this is acceptable, but they're not the person I really want to be hunting into. So I would say, hey, the AE calls on the big kahuna, the VP or the CXO, and the SDR calls on, the frontline manager, still acceptable, but not, the ideal person. And you could do it either way, of SDR calls on the high person because they have a lot of time and AE calls on the lower, or vice versa, with all 30 sequences, and then you switch. Basically, AE to DM and SDR to frontline, and then you'd switch vice versa. Number 4, you could have an AE calls on one department within the firm with all 30 sequences, and the AE and the SDR calls on a different department. So let's talk about, for instance, if I was selling into Drift and I was Chorus, and I said, okay, I'm the account executive, I'm going to run all 30 sequences on the BDR team. The SDR is going to run all 30 sequences on the AE team, or vice versa, because we sold into both. And then we're going to switch with whatever companies we weren't successful. Either one of us weren't successful. So it just becomes an expansion game at that point, but our entry point can be either one. And then number 5, you can split it up for sequences. Of the SDR runs the original 16 that I went into earlier on this slide. And then the account executive does the latter 14. So those are more AE specific, so I'd have the AE do these sequences. So that's the 5th type that you can do. So more in the other session on how to co-hunt the book together. I don't want to boil the ocean here, but these are the 5 options that you have whenever you're co-hunting with an SDR. But in some cases, to all my full cycle AEs out there who are prospecting all of their own book, you've got my heart, love, and respect, and you need to run all 30, unfortunately. So now that we know the different scenarios that you can build in the structure of sequence, let's go into relatively briefly how to personalize within each one of those emails. For a very in-depth view, go to Personalization at Scale. And for all the people who have seen Personalization at Scale, this is the time where you can peace out. It was great seeing you. Hope you come back for a couple more sessions. But for the people who haven't, I will wrap it up in this session too. There are 5 different types of personalization that you can do to the prospect in specific that you're going to pair along with the scenario or the postbound sequence reason. I start here with the most likely you are to get conversion, and I'm going to go down to the least likely. Number 1 is going to be self-authored content. So this is any kind of webinars, articles, or posts that your prospect made. You always need to have the asterisk mark in your head that whatever I pick, I'm going to then have to relate back to my product. You don't want to do the 10-80-10 where you're 10 personalized, 80% isn't, and 10 is personalized, because it starts sounding like, hey, Beck, I noticed you have red hair. Want to buy my shit? I've cursed twice in this session. I'm going to get in trouble with my mom. Hit the quarter drawer. But anywho, you get the point. First bucket, you want to always be thinking through all the buckets. You want to be thinking through what's the premise that I can then tie back to my value prop. But self-authored content, webinars, articles, posts that person made, this is the highest response rate you'll get. Number 2, engaged content, liked, shared, or commented on, but they didn't author themselves. Little less trigger rate because they weren't the hero in the situation because they didn't write it. Number 3, self-identified traits, profile line, headline, company line. So essentially, the About Me section on their profile, or a lot of people are personalizing or they're saying what they do in terms of company in that title line. It annoys the crud out of me. I wish people would just say who they are, VP of Sales, BDR, instead of like helping teams crush it with blah, 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 because I'm like, wait, who is this person? I have to go to their profile. However, point being, another topic for another time, within their headline, a lot of times people are talking about what their company does, et cetera. Or company line, sometimes when people, instead of listing Flip the Script and what Flip the Script's about, they talk about what I do at Flip, or what their role is at that company, as opposed to just the company itself. 4th bucket is junk drawer. So schools attended, personal interests, hobbies, recommendations, skill endorsements, etc. Again, remember that you have to tie it back to your value prop. A lot of personas like this. Some personas don't like it at all, so careful. Kind of a quick tip, marketing loves this usually, HR loves this, customer success likes this. Half of sales leaders like it, half of sales leaders hate it. Sales development leaders really, really like this, but more of on the disc profile, the I personalities really like it because they're creative and they're thinking a little bit in the influence realm. But the Ds, the drivers, and the Cs who are thinking all about analytics, they usually tend away from this and they think it's a little bit of an insult on their authority in the situation. So I'd be, in terms of buyer persona, I would be careful about who I'm doing this to. I wouldn't use it in all case scenarios. Techies don't really like it, meaning back-end engineers, et cetera. If they're like really into the product, typically they don't like salespeople and that's heightened for them. So I'd stay away from this kind of stuff. And then the last bucket with the least amount of conversion is going to be company specific. So more detailed but more brief you can be, the better. Because people have tried to mask personalization and make it look like it's personalized when it's not. There's a lot of templates that say, I notice your company's growing and it's not personalized, but it looks like it is. And people are ever aware of this. So you want to make sure that you say some little detail about the company, M&A posts, blogs, hiring, quotes, website language, etc., that helps them understand that you did personalize and that you do know who they are. How you can scale this, very briefly, if you go into Outreach, is one of the sales engagement platforms that I have worked with the most in terms of scaling it. Very, very simple, very, very quick. You can either ask them for the Flip the Script Beck Holland special and they will iron it in for you, or it will take 7 minutes. I've timed myself and done this for multiple people. 7 minutes to iron in all of these into the custom tags. So you can see here and on the deck, I think we'll give you a better picture, but over on the left here, it's like self-authored LinkedIn article title, excerpt, webinar title, excerpt, etc. But you can basically iron these into the custom tags so that your reps only have to research once. They can hit edit on the profile view and they can throw them in here. So I use my friend Scott Barker, my dear friend who I miss too much. I'll talk to you on Friday, Scott, shout out. Sorry for all the feelies for everyone. But Scott, he wrote an article the other day, a LinkedIn post on seeing is believing, and he had an excerpt here that says, but the key is that I had to see it first. And so I went to his profile, and under 5 minutes, you can hunt 3 of these. There's a session on how to do it in season 1, episode 19, on how to not over-research. But you can throw these premises into the custom tags, hit save, and then the great thing about Outreach is every single time you throw in a premise tag, essentially, it doesn't fill in all of the custom tags and have them empty. It only populates to the top the ones that you have a field filled in. So then you only have to research once, so that if your prospect doesn't pick up on call 1 or 2 or 3 or 8, you don't have to keep researching over and over again, so it speeds up your outreach. In terms of how to pair these together, I mentioned okay, you're going to have most scenarios where you're going to have something to mention. So here I put over content downloads, event attendees, etc. But bucket number 1 where you mention the premise, and some premises and scenarios and postbound premises where you don't mention it. So how you can pair those together in terms of personalization is the following. If you do have a postbound premise, so bucket number 1, anything that's under a bucket called with number 1, I would automate into the sequence up at the top. Reason for my outreach is I noticed you downloaded X and dynamic tag it. If you want to know more of this in execution and don't want to watch this video over 60,000 times and just want to import them in, if you go to go.regie.io, I actually have a partnership with Regie, and you can buy these sequences without watching any of these videos. But if you want to do it yourself, then keep watching, no problem. But basically, you can build in, hi, reason for my outreach is I noticed you downloaded and dynamic tag it, put in the words, but more importantly, and give them some kind of personalized summary about them. So you're going to say, hey, reason for my outreach is I noticed you watched this webinar on comprehensive AE Playbook. More importantly, I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about you. I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you're talking about scaling effective teams, or, hey, reason for my outreach is I noticed that you attended the Flip the Script tour. More importantly, I don't want to talk about the tour. I want to talk about something you did and something that's personalized to you. So that's for situation number 1, anything in bucket number 1. For bucket number 2, where you don't want to mention the premise, you want to go all personalization. So you don't have anything to mention here. So you want to say, personalized premise summary, the words 1 line in specific, and then give them an excerpt. The reason I don't do that in bucket number 1 is it gets to be a little too long, a little too wordy. So I usually say, reason for my outreach is I noticed that you wrote this article on LinkedIn talking about scaling effective teams. 1 line in specific that stood out to me was, I love Manny Medina. He said this line where if it doesn't scale, it means nothing. So you would say, I noticed that you wrote this article on scaling effective teams. 1 line that stood out to me was, if it doesn't scale, then it means nothing. So I was curious to know if you've come across Flip the Script before. So essentially, in review, you have 2 different scenarios. 1, you're going to automate in the postbound premise if you're going to mention it, transition with, but more importantly, and give them a personalized summary about something that they did. If you can't mention that premise, or it's a cold outbound sequence, then you want to say, reason for my outreach is I saw that you wrote this article. Give them a personalized premise summary. Say 1 line in specific that stood out to me, and transition to an excerpt that they have from the article. Let's go into email structure. Now we know what the first line looks like. We're talking about the reason for the outreach, and it's personalized to them, either in summary or an excerpt, both. What does the rest of the email look like? So Google did a study on how you read emails. You start at 2 o'clock and you go clockwise. So what that communicates to you about how your prospects and yourself reads emails, thank you Google, is that you want to know the end of the first line, you then go down to the end of the last line, you then go to the beginning of the last line, and then you land in the middle. So what it communicates to you is basically people want to know who you are and what you want before they want to know what your company does. The interesting thing is, most marketing teams and most sales reps all think about the perfect value prop. And it is predicated on who you are and what you want. They won't even read it if you don't nail those two buckets out correctly. So you want to make sure that in this first line, instead of saying, hi, my name's Beck and I'm from AT&T and we're the number one blah, 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 you say the reason for my outreach is you. Reason for my outreach is you did this thing, said this thing, engaged with this thing, and I want to talk about it so that you earn the right for them to go down to the CTA. The CTA is light, easy, and breezy, and so you earn the right for them to hear about what you do. So I'm going to go into a brief kind of introduction of how you can work this into personalization into a cold call, and then a little bit about email, and then we'll close out. Cold call structure, this is the beginning. If you want to know more, go to core session, I believe it's 2 on cold calls, but this is just the beginning so I can give you a flavor of where I'm tying in the personalization. I say, hi, Blake, the reason for my outreach, this is Beck calling on a recorded line with Flip the Script, how have you been? They'll say, great, is this a sales call? And I'll say, hey, that's a great question. Glad you asked. Reason for my outreach is, and I would go into personalization. If you have a personalized premise, you want to get to it. So no matter what they say in terms of question, unless it's something jarring, I've never heard something outside of this that made me stop and answer the question. I'd say reason for my outreach. So I saw you wrote this article on scaling effective teams. One line that stood out to me was, if it doesn't scale, it means nothing. So I was curious to know if you've come across Flip the Script before. So that's where I'm intertwining personalization. Let's go into emails. How do you maintain consistency for your emails with personalization? So to do this, I defer to what is called Chuck Jones theory. So essentially, Chuck Jones was the writer of Acme. Think Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, etc. And he essentially, his father was an infamously terrible businessman. And every single time, true story, that he was hired, he would get letterhead and he would get pencils and put the company name on. And whenever he was fired, a few months later, he would give it to Chuck Jones, his son, and say, just use it up. Use it up in any way possible. So Chuck Jones started drawing. And he is known for, in his lifetime, of creating up to 200,000 drawings. And he said that after 100,000 drawings, he started thinking of the rules of animation over the actual drawing itself. So, great example is if I'm going to turn an animal into a character, these are the rules. Or if I'm going to draw a beak, this is its size and these are its rules. Or if I'm going to create a head, this is how big it's going to be. But essentially he started to think about the rules of the game over the actual practitioner game itself. And when it came to Wile E. Coyote, he had a stunning thought. And I was actually talking to, shout out Jeff Winters, CEO of Sapper Consulting, great company. I was talking to him about this morning. He realized, Jeff and Chuck Jones and myself, that we are not the genesis of all creative thought. Mind-blowing, right? And that I can be strong in this game, but it's much stronger with volume of people and creativity from those people. So I cannot tell you how much I value the teams that I work with, because I would say, upwards of 50 to 60% of the ideas that I am running and now have to this day, the genesis and the source was them. They had the idea. So Chuck Jones realized when he was creating Wile E. Coyote that he had been successful, but he had been the bottleneck because he was coming up with all of the ideas. So he said, okay, I want to open this up. I want to hire very creative writers, and I want to open this idea train up to other people. But I also have the fear that they're not going to stay within consistency, and they're not going to stay on brand, and it's not going to be cohesive. So he decided that he was going to create 9 rules that people should stay within so that he wouldn't lose brand identity, he would maintain some kind of consistent flow, but he also would open up the reins of creativity so he can marry both art and science. So essentially a couple of example of the rules are here. There are 9 rules in total. One I really love is the Wile E. Coyote, that his biggest enemy is gravity whenever possible. So when I think of Wile E. Coyote, one of the first things I think about is him running off the cliff and then him falling because of gravity, because his writers were staying within those rules. So the rules for email that I've given my reps are the following. Number 1, let's start with structure. I have 4 different lines to structure of any email. The first line is the longest line, and it's going to be the premise line. And again, it's going to be the reason for your outreach, and it's going to incorporate some level of personalization. Reason for my outreach is I noticed you wrote this article on LinkedIn talking about scaling effective teams. The second line is going to be the body line, where you hook your value prop into that personalization, hook relevance into personalization. If you want to know more how to do that, go to season 2, episode 1, where I talk all about how to hook. But essentially, you are making your way back from the excerpt that you tease out back to what's relevant to them. So a great example is, if it doesn't scale, it means nothing. What if you can ensure that your reps were having high quality conversations in terms of personalization, but also scaling the amount of activity they had and scaling the net revenue and booked meetings as a result? So you want to basically give them one line where you're hooking the excerpt back to what you do. Go to season 1, episode 1 for more. And then the third line is going to be your CTA, or your call to action, where you're asking for one time to unpack what you have talked about in the above agenda. So a great example is if you give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack how VPs of sales leverage, flip the script to understand where they have a leaky funnel and how they can book more meetings and revenue than ever before, I promise that I will not jam your inbox with follow-up if you're not impressed. So you want to essentially strike up a barter where you're telling them you'll go away or you'll give them something, if they give you what you're asking for. And then the last line, I do what's called the push-pull technique. So this should be the shortest line. This line and the CTA line should be very, very short. But this should be the shortest line where you're basically saying you're communicating to your buyer, you're giving them a reprieve on the back end of either way, whether you buy my product or not, whether you give me the meeting or not, I keep the good articles coming. I'm a big fan of your team, and I hope you're staying safe with everything going on. This is a great place to intertwine COVID language, but essentially you're giving your buyer a reprieve on the back end, so it's not such a, what Chris Voss would call a yes trap, not such a cliff of is this relevant? Is this interesting? Do you want to take a meeting? And it's either way, I want to be velvet, hammer within a velvet glove of I want to be direct with what I'm asking for. Hey, I want a meeting. But either way, if you give me one or not, I hope you're staying safe. Loved the article. Keep the good stuff coming. I'm learning a lot. In terms of the types of flavors that you want to incorporate in these emails, I'm going to be very brief here. If you want to know more, go to the cold email session. I believe it's course session one within the core sessions. But the 7 flavors I'm getting my reps to intertwine is number 1, being prospect centric. I make sure that they're always about the prospect in every single word that they say. Number 2, they're pain centric. They talk more about alleviating pain or potential threat and pain that their buyer had, because that will drive more urgency than pleasure. Number 3, they're pride aversive. If anyone's the hero, it should be your prospect. Should be your prospect, it should be your customer. So I would, you don't need to go overboard and say oh my gosh, I'm the worst, and oh my gosh, I can't do anything. But a little flavor of humility is always a very, very attractive quality. So it humanizes you, it makes you more approachable, and it makes them know that you're, actually a human being on the other side. So more about this, again, go into the email section. Number 4, fluidity, really easy to do in theory, hard to do in practice, tying your premise line to your value prop line to your CTA to your push-pull. Sounds easy in theory, hard to do in practice. If you are having trouble here and you feel like it's not one fluid email or it's super confusing, a quick tip here is to pick one value prop and nail that home per email, and don't multi-value prop of like, we do this, 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 and this. It making me think of, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Aladdin, where in the very beginning, the guy's like, hey, we sell this, it's, coffee maker sells julienne fries, da da da. Like, he's going on with like 6 different value props. So that's what it makes me think of, but you want to avoid that and only pick one value prop when you're talking to someone. Relevance predicated on buyer persona, so I would just make sure that you're always talking about the things that that person cares about in specific. Brevity, I'll be brief. Never use 7 words when 4 words will do. Noticeability, this is all in your subject line. The goal is to get an open without feeling like a bait and switch. So everyone can get an email open by saying free puppies. But unless your email is about free puppies, the person who opened that email is going to be mad because they're going to feel duped. So you want to be careful not to do that. I'm going to go into 7 deadly sins, and then we can tie out. Things to avoid. Number 1, being too casual or too silly with your prospect. Always want to lead with respect. I wouldn't become jokey. That's not how to build rapport. You want to pattern interrupt, but you want to be different, but you don't want to be silly. Number 2, I'd avoid wasted texts. I know you're busy, but just want to follow back up. Just want to circle back. I'd love to. Happy Monday. Hope you and your kids are doing safe during these uncertain times. Wasted text that triggers pattern recognition in our buyer's mind that we are a seller, and they instantly want to delete the email. And also on a side note, this is the most valuable real estate, according to that Google study, of your entire email. So you want to make sure that you are using that wisely and not talking about a football game. Right? So unless it was they played for Stanford and you want to tie that back to your value prop and it's your personalization reason. Number 3, being the authority of the prospect. TLDR, if I say do not push this button, what do you want to do? Push the button. We have 3 ego states. One of them instantly wants to rebel. It's the child adaptive ego state. If you want to hear more about it, there's a session in season 1 on the 3 ego states. But whenever you command someone to do something, especially if you're not their superior, they instantly want to rebel. So if you're doing this against a prospect, and it can be very slight, let me know, or I'd be happy to show you my product. I'm like, well, no duh, you're selling to me, right? I know you'd be happy to, but you want to avoid any kind of command to your prospect. Number 4, questioning the prospect's authority, always a no-no, whether they're the DM or not. Number 5, making your prospect feel not okay, either by mudslinging against your competitors. What Sarah says about Sally says more about Sarah than Sally, so careful. When you talk negatively about your competitors, it's just a mirror to your prospect, or a mirror of who you are to your prospect, reflected to your prospect. Glorifying yourself, talking about how awesome you are. As much as I want to tell you guys all about my wicked awesome shoe collection and how many friends I don't have, you want to avoid glorifying yourself, and if you're going to glorify anyone, glorify your prospect. Number 7, making your prospect feel stupid. Very, very slight, very easy to do. If you ask the question to someone, does that make sense? The reaction is like, yeah, it makes sense. Like I get that you want to check for comprehension. Great way to do this is, am I making any sense? Over, does that make sense? So in summary, I know that being an account executive is very, very tough. And people who say that salespeople are not that talented have never been a salesperson. Selling is one of the hardest things to do. You have to drum up rapport and respect out of thin air with someone that you don't know. And it's one of the most aggressively, emotionally aggressive, and hardest, technically outcome only, you're the king or queen of conversion based on outcome only, not theory, jobs out there. And so I have a massive amount of respect for account executives who are out there, especially during a time in a climate like COVID, trying to push product when it's harder than ever before with buyers. But there is a silver lining. You can make it a predictable revenue, so to speak, input-output engine. So instead of making it a game of, I think that I should try more and I should add some activity, or maybe I should go this angle, you can go all angles and very, very quickly and personalize and bring integrity back to the game in terms of that personalization. So I'm very, very excited that we now have a way to bring personalization, bring these scenarios, bring these postbound premises back to sales engagement so that sales engagement isn't the enemy. It's not something that helps us blast people to death with all these irrelevant messages, but helps us leverage that to understand from a data perspective, what are the things that I need to start doing? What are the things I need to do more of? And what are the things that I need to stop doing so that I can make my quota attainment into a predictable input-output game where I know that if I send these emails with this sequence, then I'm going to get this amount of results. So that is the first time in history we're going to be able to do this, and which absolutely thrills me. So number one, mad props to you if you're watching this video and you're an account executive. Like, I'm just so proud of that community and where it's come. And number two, I'm just so excited about all the room that we have left to run. So thanks for tuning in. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session and want to hear more and didn't get enough of my voice today, go to flipthescript.co and you can see a bunch of different sales topics and sessions just like this one. And if you really love this session, you want to give me some feedback, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, give us a follow, tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.